Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fearless Backgammon, Episode 1. And in Match 1, Game 1, we're going to look at an interesting struggle for the outfield, for outfield control, and how keeping spare checkers on your midpoint versus stripping your midpoint or breaking your midpoint can affect outfield control. There's also an interesting point related to our theme of playing backgammon with less fear. And so look out for that point and think about how to take more calculated risks, right? Okay, so I hope you enjoy the episode and feel free to leave some comments or suggestions um, after you watch. Great, thanks.
Right, so let's start game one from the first match. And white opens with a 6-1 and makes the bar point, of course, and black makes his 4-point with 4-2. White splits a back checker. Some beginner players kind of hesitate to split like this. They think they're going to get attacked more easily, and that's true, but it's still early in the game. Black doesn't have such a threatening position, and it's important to get the back checkers moving. You've got to get them around the board at some point. This 6-1 is interesting. Normally, of course, 6-1 is good to make the bar point, but here, not so much. And you notice that it's considered a blunder to do so, right? Once white has a checker on sort of advanced on black's 5-point here, it's not so useful to make the bar point. And of course, you leave a blot on the 8-point. Instead, it's much more important to fight for the 5-point. It's true that black leaves a couple of blots, but it's still early in the match. White doesn't have a strong home board, any really developed home board. So it's worth taking a risk at this point. Remember, in backgammon, you have to take risks, right? And it's just a question of weighing the risks. And in this case, there's not a huge risk to being hit. And it's much more important to fight for a better position. So black correctly hits on the 5-point. White comes in and hits back. With the 1, it seems like it's a small mistake, but nothing major. Okay, so now black has come in and made his bar point, and the game is about even, right? Perhaps black is a little behind, but black has 3 checkers back, white has 2 checkers back, but black's home board is a little better developed. So really the game plan here is for black to get his back checkers moving and white to either anchor and start developing his home board or get his own checkers out. But this roll doesn't really help a lot. It would be nice to perhaps move one of the back checkers out into the outfield, but there's no really good 2 is the problem. This is the main alternative, and it's considered a blunder, just because it's too inflexible to have this huge stack of 6 checkers on the 6-point. It's there are going to be problems later with this inflexibility. So even though I talked about one of the principles being don't strip the midpoint too early, you can't be too dogmatic about it. And in this case, it is important to fight for the 5-point. And there's also another kind of principle, which is to strive for the initiative. The initiative as a concept means that your opponent is responding to your moves. They're not initiating their own plans. And generally, this is something to look out for, right? So white takes away part of black's role by hitting. And this prevents black from, for example, attacking on his own kind of side of the board. Okay, so even though it's likely that white will get hit and have another checker sent back, it's important to try to fight for the initiative, fight for position, for the 5 point. And if white gets hit, there's perhaps a chance that he'll be able to make that anchor on the 20 point. Yes, black comes in and hits, and as I predicted, white is able to make his 20 point, the advanced anchor. So now both players have 3 checkers back. Now this is an interesting point, and this is an example of that principle of not stripping your midpoint too early in the game, right? In this case, it's much better to come out with one of the back checkers, okay? Because both players want to get their back checkers into the outfield, it's good to do so first because you cover the outfield more, okay? And notice also that if black jumps out, yes, white can hit black, but then white would likely have to break his own midpoint to do so. And that might lead to white's back checkers being cut off from the rest of his army, so to speak. Okay, so by playing this move, black's position is a little too front-loaded in a way. So because white has an advanced anchor, it's not so effective to have a spare checker on the 7. Black wants spare checkers further back in order to build blocking points in the outfield on the 9 point or the 10 point or the 11 point, right? So that's why, there are a number of reasons, but that's one of the reasons why it's best to jump out and not strip the midpoint here too early. And white is very happy with this roll. As I mentioned, both players should want to get, at least one back checker out into the outfield to kind of control it a little better, and that's what white is able to do with this roll. Black hits, and interestingly, notice that the 6 is not ideal here, as played by black. And in fact, black should come out with the 6. Now, it's not often that the top recommended move leaves 5 blots. And, it's good to be wary about that, right? Leaving too many blots. It's true that black is putting white on the bar, so perhaps the danger isn't so great. But, a double 3 joker would really hurt. I agree. But do keep in mind that white's home board is not very strong, okay? And this is all consistent with the goal of trying to control the outfield, okay? And black's move kind of gives up the outfield, doesn't it? And puts a spare checker on the 7 point that is not so useful, okay? And XG's recommended move, yes, it's a little loose, but it also gives black more chances to fight for the outfield and maybe even remake the midpoint, right? So I think black played this move really quickly, and it would have been worth thinking about it from a strategic point of view. White comes in, but it's not always great to come in when you have an uncomfortable roll, is it? And in this case, the 4. What do you do with the 4? Well, as a general principle, if you have an uncomfortable roll to play, then unstack a point. That's one thing to look for, okay? And the 6 point is quite heavy, so using the 4 to unstack the 6 point makes sense. And then another principle is to minimize shots, right? And playing the 4 from the 6 point also minimizes shots. So that's the best move. Black is able to tidy up his position a little and finally make his anchor there. And again, we have something of an uncomfortable roll. And This is perhaps not so obvious, right? But notice that all the other options are blunders. And this is because white really wants to get this back checker moving. It's not very useful here. It's liable to be attacked. And by jumping to the 20 point, it will be easier for white to put that checker into the outfield and fight for the outfield. Now, the problem, of course, is the 3. And in this case, putting another blot in the home board, it looks scary, doesn't it? Black has a double shot, can send 1 or 2 checkers back. But, that's... you have to take that risk at this point, okay? Because it's much more important to try to fight for the outfield. And if white gets hit, hopefully, white can enter and then recirculate those checkers into the outfield and fight for the outfield, okay? At this point, it doesn't seem like white is able to put together a strong home board, so it looks like his best chances are to fight in the outfield as opposed to trying somehow to batten the hatches. Now, keep in mind also that, yes, white has 2 blots and a double shot, right? But that's only 20 rolls out of 36 for black to hit. And that means that there are 16 rolls out of 36 where black misses. So that's another consideration. Okay, 6-5, he misses. That's one of the 16 rolls. And instead, black makes a home board point, strengthens his home board. And white rolls well, okay, he brings that checker out into the outfield and makes a home board point, cleans up the blots. Okay, and here black is correct to run out. He's ahead in the race. And, putting checkers behind the 5-point anchor is not really an efficient use. So it's good to jump out here into the outfield, but he should have tried to do that earlier, right? Now it's not as advantageous. We've got multiple shots now, and white can just roll a 6 to hit instead of breaking his midpoint, that kind of thing. But in any case, it is the right idea to jump out. White hits, okay, and black comes in with not a great roll. He's stuck in the back, and he has to bury a checker, basically, with the 6. And kaboom! White comes in with double 6s. Black was ahead in the race, but now white is ahead in the race, and he leaps out and then uses the other 2 6s to attack. Of course, there's also consideration that black is aiming at white's blot on the 9-point, and therefore it's a good idea to attack just so there are fewer hitting numbers for black. And now black comes in and jumps out. And this is a mistake. The situation has changed. Before, black was ahead in the race. Now black is behind in the race. So it's wrong to jump out and put yourself under the gun. It's a much better idea to sit back, strengthen your home board, and then hopefully, wait for a shot. Okay, so don't race when you're behind in the race. White hits and manages to cover the 9-point. And black comes in with a double 3, strengthens his home board, and white has to be a little careful now. It's if he does get hit, there could be some issues, right? But interestingly enough, white finds a double here. And it's interesting because at first glance, it doesn't look like a double. And in fact, it's not a mistake, right, to not double this. It's very close. It's very marginal. But there are a couple considerations. One is that, yes, white is ahead in the race. He does have some threats of pointing on black's blot on the 3-point. There's also possibilities of making the 7-point and setting up a good blocking position. And the other consideration, though, is that black is running out of time. Okay, and you can see that black has only 1/6 left on his side of the board, and a 6 from can't be played by his checker on that 3-point, right? Which means that there's a possibility that black might be forced off his advanced anchor, and that could be a big problem for black. Okay, even in terms of losing gammons. Yeah, so that's another reason why this is a double or very close to a double. So in general, to improve your level of backgammon, one thing is to be a little more aggressive with the cube. Think about doubling earlier than you normally do. Of course, not recklessly, but keep in mind that strong players win more games of 2 points or even 4 points after a gammon compared to weaker players who generally win more games of 1 point. And that's because the stronger players double earlier and double more aggressively. And so look out for that in terms of improving your backgammon. So that being said, it's an easy take for black. He's got his anchor, defensive anchor. He's got the stronger home board. The race isn't so out of reach, and there aren't that many threats. So it is quite an easy take for black. Okay, so white rolls a 4-1. And this is already quite interesting, right? And it comes down to that pay now or pay later kind of concept. So in this case, white plays safely and buries a checker on the 2-point. And XG considers this a mistake. Okay, XG suggests that now is the time to take a little risk and start clearing the midpoint. The idea, of course, is that black's home board has a blot in it and another open point. So if white is hit, then it's not such a disaster. Okay, and white is probably going to have to take a risk sooner or later in clearing this 13-point, right? You can't count on doubles to clear it. And so now is probably the best time, especially since keeping the spare checker on the 6-point could be quite useful in the near future. That being said, it's not a big mistake, and this is partly because of what I mentioned, that black is running out of time. He might be forced off his anchor. So there are some upsides to not taking a risk and leaving a shot at this point. But all in all, it was better to start clearing the 13-point now. It's ironic that black would have hit with this roll if white had started clearing the 13-point, but that's backgammon. Instead, black strengthens his home board and gets ready for a shot. And as I mentioned, this is a roll where basically white has to take the risk, right, and leave some indirect shots. But black's home board is now stronger, so it would have been better to take that risk a roll earlier. Luckily, black misses, but this is a good roll for the race, right? So the race is much closer now, so black has some shot equity, right? Some chances of hitting a shot, as well as some race equity, some chances of running from that back anchor and being able to win the race. Speaking of race, this isn't a good roll for the race, but at least white, safeties that blot. And black is also not racing ideally. Wow, this is like a foot race between two octogenarians, very slow. And lo and behold, black is forced off his anchor, right? This was one of the reasons why white doubled against this possibility. And white rolls a great number and is able to hit the blot and cover and make the 4-point. Black dances. White clears another outfield point. And black stays out yet again. So it does look like white has things pretty much under control, right? He's ready to make another home board point. He's just got basically a couple of rolls before he's ready to bear off, right? So it does look pretty good for white at this point. But this roll is not so comfortable, is it? It's okay, but, for example, it doesn't leave a blot or anything like that. But it would have been nice to have made another home board point. And black comes in basically just in time. And lo and behold, white has to leave a shot at the very last minute. One thing to think about psychologically is you shouldn't get upset about having to leave a shot, okay? I can understand if you're upset when you're actually hit at the last minute, but I notice that some players do kind of get upset when, so-called they're unlucky to leave a shot. Well, they're not exactly unlucky yet, are they? They have to be hit to be really unlucky, okay? So from a psychological point of view, try not to waste too much emotion, right? And get too stressed about leaving a shot. Wait to see what'll happen. But black hits, okay? And the tables have turned, and now black is quite a big favorite. But notice that this is quite a big blunder. Okay, in fact, maybe black was so happy to hit, but that he maybe didn't consider that he has to lift the blot in his home board. Okay, there's no point in risking. By leaving that blot in your home board. If there were real gammon chances, then it might be worth considering taking the risk of getting hit. But black has only hit one checker. It's unlikely that he'll get a second checker. And so the gammon chances are actually very low. And in that case, it's better to lift the checker and prepare to redouble, right? Because, by leaving the blot there, if white hits back, then it would be very difficult to redouble from the bar, wouldn't it? So that's why this is quite a big mistake. No need to take the risk. And just wait, hopefully, to redouble. There are very few rolls that white can do to avoid a redouble next roll. White can't get in, and as I said, black redoubles, and white has to pass. He's behind in the race, and there are covering numbers, and he's going up against a 5-point board. It's just not possible to take this cube. Okay, so that was a rather sudden reversal at the end. That happens in backgammon, right? White played quite well. Black not so well, but that's backgammon. The best player or in a particular game doesn't necessarily win, but it's a 7-point match. There's still plenty of play in the match, so let's see how things pan out. And I hope you'll come back to watch Game 2. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned from it, and see you for Match 1, Game 2.